evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and I'm never quite sure how to feel during the bye week. On the one hand, we didn't win, but on the bright side, we didn't lose. Tonight, we have a very special podcast where we'll provide our mid-season review of the Demons' outstanding first half of the 2021 season. Joining me to do just that is longtime Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy, and good evening, Bin Man out there, and good evening, all our listeners. It's a strange feeling for all of us, isn't it? And where do we go from here, and why have we got here where we are today? And we'll work through all of that tonight.
Yeah, we will find out the answers. At least we'll try to find out. Also joining us to discuss our best start to the season since the mid-60s is our tactical analysis guru, Bin-Man. Good evening, Bin-Man.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George, and good evening, Demonlanders. And the break came at a good time for me, and something I've done well all season is to reset. So I've reset, and I stayed away from much of the footy media in the last couple of weeks, just a drib here and a drab there. And but the last few days I've gone through each of the KO minis and watched them all to catch up and prepare. And I can highly recommend that for any Dees fan out there to watch them all in one sitting or two sittings. Each go for about 17, 18 minutes. And it was a thrill to watch each game, safe in the knowledge that 11 of them we win.
Yeah, I wasn't, in terms of watching other footy this round, which we weren't a part of, I found there was a lack of praise for Melbourne across the board. I felt we didn't get enough due over this non-Demon week. But that's for another day.
But at least your MFCSS didn't get worse, did it?
Oh, slightly. That Bulldogs Geelong game. But we'll talk about my MFCSS in a minute, because I'm going to talk about it soon. What an amazing year we've had. None of us in our wildest dreams would have ever thought we would be first place on the ladder, a game clear, I might add, with 11 wins and 2 losses going into the bye. We've got a long way to go until that last day in September, and sure, at times the lid has been well and truly off. And as a Demon fan with a healthy dose of that MFCSS, and for new listeners, that's the Melbourne Football Club Supporters Syndrome that many of us Demonlanders suffer as a result of decades of false dawns and numerous disappointments. And I'm well aware that the dream that we're currently living can be extinguished at any time, and our run home and into the finals is going to test us, and it'll show us exactly where we sit in relation to our competition and give us a good indication of what this team is truly made of and whether we really are generally the real deal. But tonight isn't solely about the dreams that may come. Tonight we're going to delve into the reason we're sitting 11-2 at the mid-season break. Tonight we'll look at the coaching structures and each of their different roles, how they've been impacted by the soft cap as a result of COVID, and the importance of experience in those structures. We'll also focus on the big boss, Simon Goodwin, and see what changes he's made to his coaching style this year, and is he still the right man for the job? And Bin-Man will take us on a deep dive of our tactics, game plan and all that jazz, and I will then take you on a journey through our run home and all the possible scenarios that will lead us to September glory. Spoiler warning, there is a doomsday scenario, which is the most Melbourne of all possible scenarios, which could see us not making the finals at all. So stay tuned for that one. It's catnip for the pessimistic Demon fan. George will take us through an analysis of our opposition with summaries of game styles of the teams we're likely to be competing with and how our game plan stacks up against them. And finally, we'll take a look at the guys who make the magic happen and give our opinions on who we think is leading the Bluey at this point and who might win, the most improved player, the best defender, the best midfielder, the best forward, as well as analysing our team's depth. There's a lot to unpack tonight, so stay tuned. And if you're listening live, feel free to give us a call with your thoughts on any of these topics. We love hearing the opinions of other Demons fans, so give us a call on 03 9016 3666, 03 9016 3666, or give us Skype us at Demonland31. You can also join us in our chat room at demonland.com/podcast, and you can make a comment, ask a question. We'll be monitoring it, and we'll read out the best ones. So without further ado, boys, I dare say that none of us have experienced a start to the year quite like this one. How have you been enjoying the footy this year? More importantly, how are your families coping with your passion for and your time spent with the Dees this year? George, I might start with you.
It's an unusual experience for us, isn't it? Very pleasant. You start to understand how the Hawthorns and the Geelongs and the West Coasts have felt over those years when they had powerhouse teams. But I think we might have a powerhouse team here. My wife has managed to ignore me, of course, but then she's been doing that for in terms of football matters for all of our married life, so I don't need to worry about that. But yeah, it's a very unusual experience for all of us. And I think the theme of tonight that we'll start to unpack a little bit is this success that we've achieved so far is not the result of just one thing. It's a whole series of things that have come into play through design or luck, or in some cases. But we'll work through those progressively in the night and see where the what all those positives that we've put into the club and the actions that have been taken have come to fruition. We'll see where it's all come from and where it's going to.
Big man.
Yeah, it's been great, hasn't it? And certainly, of course, it's a season thus far, and it's as Lever said, we've done nothing yet. After the Collingwood game, he was spot on. But what a start to a season, and it's been a dream. In terms of my family, a shout out to D Future 15, who asked me to direct message me and asked me this question and asked if we'd cover it off. But my family has been looking on with a bit of amusement. I think my wife's German, and she just cannot. She's never been to a game of footy, and I don't think there's any chance I'll get her there. So I'm a bit in your field there, George, because she's sort of ambivalent either way. So I've just been left to get on with my own devices, and I expect that everyone's a little bit more pleased than they were in 2019, for instance, or even last year, in terms of, my mood's been a little bit more steady, I'd have to say, come post-game day this year. But, it's just been fantastic, hasn't it?
What about you, Andy?
I've my wife knows full well where during footy season where my loyalties lie, and she's rapped for me because every season since I've known her and we've been together, it's always been a matter of a case of it's got to be this year, we're going to improve, and mostly it hasn't improved, and we've had quite a few false dawns. Actually, within the first year that we knew each other, we made a grand final, and I and she thought there'd be years and years of dynasties then. But alas, that hasn't been the case. But yeah, she's been extremely supportive to the point where I was getting very nervous when we were in lockdown, thinking, we're not going to see any more footy this year, and they're going to go and hub up in the Gold Coast. And she was very supportive of me if we were to make the finals, to somehow get up there if I could. And but look, hopefully that doesn't happen, and we start playing footy here again, which we are this week. And yeah, she's been very supportive. She's couldn't be happier for me. So, if I'm, what do they say? They say usually happy wife, happy life. But in this case, it's happy
Handy.
Good.
Also dandy.
No, it's like Dee's doing well, happy Andy, and happy Andy.
Well, my son hasn't. He was a Melbourne fan. Well, he's not much of a footy fan, full stop. But he's been getting into it a bit more, and he actually came to a game of footy with me this year, the Swans game, and. The last time him and I went to the footy together was way back when we came back from 40-odd points down against the Dockers at the MCG. We're sitting down the bottom it was like COVID times because there was only about 10,000, 15,000 people there. But I can't even remember what year that was, but that's probably at least 10 years ago.
Well, yeah. Look, it's a good time to be a Demon fan. I've had people calling me throughout the season. They know what a hardcore Demon fan I am, and most people couldn't be happier for us. And they're like, everyone sort of wants to see the Dees have their time in the sun, and let's hope it continues and we can sort of get some celebrations. But let's talk about how we've been. Well, actually, I didn't have this question down, but I thought I'd ask you before we go on to anything, where you actually thought would be in terms of wins and losses at the beginning of the season, or when we got the fixture last year, where you thought would be at this stage of the year. None of you, obviously, well, I don't know, Big Man, you're very positive. You might have thought we'd be in this situation, but even the most optimistic of fans wouldn't have thought we'd be top of the ladder. Big Man, I'll start with you. What did you think realistically? Where would we be in terms of wins and losses at this time of the year?
I don't know that I thought sort of halfway, as I said at the beginning of the year on the podcast, is the first 4 games were going to be critical for where we ended up. We played, some teams that were around us, Saints, GWS, Geelong, of course. So they were really important games for our season looking back. But, I was pretty confident at the beginning of the season that we were a top 4 side. I was extremely confident we'd make the 8. And I felt that given our list and if we have a bit of luck with injuries, that we should be expecting as a footy club to be pushing for top 4. So, of course, 11-2 is, I wouldn't have put money on 11-2. But, I thought at the beginning of the season top 4 was a realistic goal.
George?
I think we're all expecting that we should be making finals this year, and if we're seriously challenging for top 4, that we would have to have been a couple of games ahead of the half sort of 50-50 point. So you would think, 7 wins maybe up to this point might have been suitable sort of numbers. It's amazing though when you think about it that the games that we lost have been against teams that are well below us, and we really shouldn't perhaps have lost those games. But I don't think anybody would have expected that we would have won all of those games against people like Richmond and Brisbane and Geelong in the lead up. I think people would have been happy with half of those, and then hopefully pick off all the St Kildas and the rest of them. But we're in a fabulous position. But as Jake Lever said, we haven't won anything yet. We've got to continue it. And there's the reminder of North Melbourne in 2016, who were 10-1, I think, at the midway point, and fell into the finals and were eliminated in the first week of the finals. So things can turn. In their case, they had a fabulous run, and injuries cruelled them towards the end. But I think our circumstances are different. We've been beating top teams to get there, so I don't think we'll have a similar sort of drop-off.
All right, well, let's get stuck into the meat and bones of tonight's mid-season review and start with the Brains Trust that has created the blueprint to get us into first place on the ladder. 1 game clear with 11 wins and 2 losses. George, in a minute, you're going to take us through the coaching structure and the roles that the different assistants have. But first, we're going to play a sound clip from Alan Richardson. Do you remember where this was from?
It was off the Melbourne Footy Club site. I actually heard Richardson give a talk to a group of members as well, separately, but the subject matter was the same. So it was really great that this was able to be shared with the general membership. So, Andy, it's a great introduction and actually gives a lot of explanation for why we are where we are.
All right, here goes.
So, Alan, we're talking about reviews in regards to another footy club at the moment, but I'm just interested into what happened at the end of last year. You joined originally, I think, as the director of coaching, and then your role changed. A few people moved around inside the footy department. So I guess I'm just interested into what actually changed, and it has gone to show that, with similar people in the same footy department, you change things around a little bit, and you get a very different result, at least, wins and losses.
Yeah, well, the review, Sam, also coincided with a fair bit of money getting taken out of the soft cap, so all clubs had to look at their people, their head count, drop programs, keep people, was basically what we did. We knew that we we had to make change. So there was a bit of the review, but there was a bit of just reality in terms of what happened. We decided to, because of the need for people to play many roles, we went with experience. So Mark Williams, who can, head of development, also plays some really, has some specific focuses with the AFL program as well. Adam Uzo not only does stoppage and midfield, but he also does our ball movement. But, younger blokes wouldn't have been able to handle that or cope with that. It was really pretty important that those people have also been involved with winning. So some pretty important decisions there that so far are going really well.
George, you want to?
Yeah, it's interesting, and just to pick up on a couple of points that Alan Richardson went through very quickly. The coaching arrangements we got were forced upon us by the soft cap, but we've been very fortunate. People will remember the review that Pert did internally at the end of last year. So coming with those two things have come together fortuitously for us, but also it's about planning. So we've got a variety of coaches now that are more experienced in the coaching field, and importantly, as Richard has said, they come from winning environments, and also the demands of coaching are pretty horrendous. We've seen the effects on the personal lives of particularly senior coaches over the time. It's also important that, as Alan said, young blokes can't cope with the demands of that. So when you've got fewer coaches, you really need them to be able to be on the job all the time. So when you bring in people like Uze and Choco and Chaplin and Greg Stafford, these guys have been around for a long, long time. They're not the latest people who've retired last year from from playing the football. The other important thing, and this was told to the other group that I was present at, was that because we've got a limited number of coaches, the messages don't get diluted by multiple assistants with different views. So if you've got 10 assistant coaches, as a lot of clubs have or used to have, the message to the younger players gets diluted. Each assistant's trying to have their own little input, but when you've only got 4 or 5 coaches, effectively, the message gets through pretty quickly. So that's really important when you're developing players, that they get the right message all the time and consistently. And just to back this up, Andy's got another little quick sound clip from Max Gawn talking about that messaging.
Max, obviously ultimate success is determined later in the year, but from your perspective, how much satisfaction are you deriving as for seeing this group grow and mature, and even a game like last weekend where you come from 20 points down at halftime, something that you may not have been able to do in previous seasons?
You do get satisfaction when you see stuff that you've been working on for 3 or 4 years come out, obviously out onto the ground. And I've talked about this during the week, but Troy Chaplin's been almost barking at the same thing for the last 4 years defensively, and it's just starting to finally click now. And seeing that click and then seeing how we can keep that going certainly makes coming to the club a little bit easier Monday to Friday. But there's certainly this, there's definitely not resting on our laurels. There's this unrest about every game that we've got to go out and be the hunters, because you never know when the competition can flip on its head, and we've got to make sure we're at the top of our game at all times. So there is pleasure watching things come to fruition from things you've been working on for a long time, but you've got to stay on top of your game in this competition.
Yeah, I think that gives a good idea of the benefits of that simple message, but it's a repeated and reproduced message that's coming from the assistant coaches, as he's, to use Bax's words, Troy Chaplin's been banging on about this for years, so the message does get through. But so that's a great insight. There was another little small insight that we got from Ed Langdon as well, when he was talking about Choco in, again, an article from the on the website, I think it was, where he said, talking about Choco, he's come in with a program and it was initially a shock to the system, but no doubt it helped the whole team. I haven't seen anyone come into a club and have as big an impact on a team as he's had in my whole career. So once again, the value that these more experienced coaches has brought to the club is producing the results that we've wanted to see for a couple of years. The other thing I think that's really valuable is that each of the new assistants, particularly Choco and Uze, has brought something very different. Uze is there for his analysis as well as his midfield role, but Mark Williams has also brought the kicking aspect to it. Successful teams, and we've seen it in the past, the Hawthorns in particular, and Bin Man loves this. Kicking is the ultimate goal. A team has to be able to deliver under pressure. And when you look at the Melbourne side from 12 months ago or 2 years ago, whichever you want to look at, the change in the accuracy and the capability of our kicking has dramatically improved. And I'd put this basically down to having Mark Williams in that role and what he's brought. And as Ed Langdon said, he's made a dramatic change to the whole team.
Just on that, George, a couple of things that on the kicking. I listened to an interview with Spargo today that's on the MFC site, and he talked about his kicking actually and said that it really helps to play in a good team. And his point was that you look up and people are in the right spots, your forwards are leading properly, you've got T-Mac coming at you. And I thought it was a really interesting point that the better the team, the better you're kicking. And we'll talk about it a bit later in terms of how predictable we are. And I think that's been a big factor. And I think that one of the things that you picked up there, George, I think is really interesting is the role of Chaplin, because he's really who's the ruck coach again? Stafford. They're the only two really that remain from that review, with the exception, of course, of Alan Richardson, but who's moved into a non-direct football role. And Chaplin's been the defensive coach now for, I think I'm right in saying it's his fourth season as defensive coach. And it really speaks to the point that Max made in that clip, is that, Rome wasn't built in a day, and this is a progression, coming back from 2017 when Goody first started as senior coach, and probably when Chaplin, I think he was 2018, wasn't he? So he's been really important, and I hadn't really sort of considered his importance until a number of media in the last couple of weeks, or a number of players have pointed that out, and his name's come up a lot more in terms of the defensive work that we've been good at. And just the other thing, George, I think's a really good point you make is the maturity of that group of coaches. And Uze seems like a really good energy, really level-headed, I should say. And they seem to be that group of coaches seem to complement each other well. And Choco's energy that's been commented on so much, they've found a way to really harness that. They've got Chaplin in the box with Uze, and then on game day, they're in the box on game day with Goody on the bench, and also Choco on the bench as well. And so I think that they've really got a good structure in terms of who's doing what. And I think it's interesting, Stafford is their goal-kicking coach, and we've been more accurate this year. So I heard Max say that he's the only ex-ruckman ever to be a goal-kicking coach. So... Well, it's a really good mix, isn't it?
As you mentioned, Bin Man, on game day, we do have a different setup in terms of where the coaches are situated than most other clubs. I guess more and more we're seeing some of the head coaches take up a position on the bench close to the players who are resting, so that they can issue their instructions, give praise or some constructive criticism directly. We're seeing this with the Dees, with Goody and Choco on the bench, as you mentioned, and Uze and Chaplin with the better vantage point up in the coaches' box. So what do you guys reckon of this structure? Do you think that's had any effect on our performances this year, or is it just a coincidence, or just in general, what are your thoughts? I might go to you, George, first.
I think we underestimate the difficulties of match day coaching. One of our people on Demonland, Bagday Bob, spent some time 10 years ago with Danaher and spent some time in the box with him. And one of the things that he picked up and has told us about is that on the day, and this is going back when Danaher was coaching, in order to implement a change on the field during the actual game time, you have the opportunity to do it at halftime and quarter time, things like that. It takes nearly 15 minutes to get the message down to the runner, to get it out to the players, and if you've got multiple players that you need to make a change with, it's about 15 minutes. So you actually can't implement a great deal on the ground, particularly with a young team that Danaher had in a lot of cases. These days we've got some really experienced leaders on the ground at last. This has taken as many years, and those type of changes can be implemented on the ground. The leaders know what to do naturally, and even if they don't pick it up and a message still has to come out, once you get the message out to one person, it's easily disseminated. So there's been a big change in the way things happen around the messaging getting out on the ground. So the overall on-field leadership has improved dramatically. What that means is that that for the main coach in Goodwin, he's far more relaxed about it, which is of course easy when you're winning games, but the messaging remains the same. So the whole system's just working well. We've got a more mature group, far better leadership, and with experienced coaches in the box and on the box and on the ground, the messaging is getting through quickly and efficiently. So that's why I think we're seeing such a dramatic change in what's happening on the field, and the results are coming.
I can't remember who it was. It was sometime in the last week or so, and I can't remember whether it was a current day coach or it was a past coach, and they did ask the question about being in the box or on the field, and it might have been during a game. I can't remember who it was. It might have even been Lee Matthews or someone, and they said they obviously didn't agree with the down on the field aspect of it. They wanted to be higher up to get that. I like it when I'm at the ground to be able to see what's happening around the ground, and I guess you don't get that. Down on the ground, but it seems to be working for us. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it goes to my point about the mix of coaches they've got in. I think the way they've got their structure set up on game day really suits their personalities. Like someone like Choco is a player who's a coach who's a player's coach, and he wants to communicate, directly with his players. And so the obvious spot for that is the on the bench. And I think Goody's the same. I feel like Goody in the box, he's sort of, I think he likes standing and moving. You can see in the box he seems to get anxious, but I think his strength is his interpersonal communication with his players, and he can do that on the bench. He can give his messages, and then it's it just has to be good communication between the box. As George noted, that Uze's been he's got a strength around analysis, but he's also in charge of ball movement, so he needs to be up high to see where that's at. Both those elements, and Chaplin is in charge of defence, but also keeping in mind is, and we'll touch on this in a bit, but defence isn't just the back six, as George has noted any number of times. It's the whole team defence. So he also needs to be up high and in the box. So I think that it's been actually a really positive factor. How much, you can't measure it, I guess, except 11-2 will do as a measure. But, yeah, I think that the setup really suits all of them, and in particular I think it suits Goody because he can communicate sort of directly to his players, and I think he's got a real calmness on the bench that I think could only be helpful for his players as he comes off and he gives them their messages. He, even when the game's close and it's and there's a fair bit of tension in the ground, he seems to manage that tension really well on the bench from the visuals you see on the telly and stuff. So I think it's been a really important change this year actually.
Well, speaking of Simon Goodwin, let's talk about him. There is a massive threat on Demonland, and over the previous 2 years, 2019, 2020, it's been extremely active. It's entitled, Is Goody the Right Guy? And in 2019 and 2020, there were a lot of people not happy that Goody was given the extension after the 2018 season, and then subsequently when he failed to get us back into the finals, the calls for his head in that thread had been relentless. Conversely, that thread has been very quiet in 2021, surprise, surprise, certainly in the first 9 weeks of the year. And coincidentally, the only time that thread has resurfaced has been after our 2 losses, admittedly to teams we should have beaten. But I'm not surprised by the timing of that. I don't think that thread will ever truly die. And given the fickle nature of a lot of people, we could actually win a premiership and then subsequently lose the next year's first Marsh Series game, and that thread would come back with a vengeance. So how do you boys think Goody is doing this year? Has there been changes in his coaching style, his confidence, his messaging, Bin Man?
I think it's been a sort of evolution. He's easy to, I guess, sort of, make jokes about his some of his mannerisms, and for me, I feel like he's much more confident in the role. His messaging has been clear. Some of what appeared to be cliches, the identifiable Melbourne brand, Melbourne football, those sorts of things that sounded a bit hollow when we were struggling, and now they have a much more meaning, and he's clearly, a player's coach. The players love him. It seems to me that he's more confident in the media. He's stronger in that, which I think is, it's not the be all and end all, and I think it's overplayed a bit. That's not his job, but it's still important. I wouldn't want to underplay it. But he's been much more positive with the media this year, and we'll play a clip a bit later that picks it up. He's got a bit of steel about him this year too, which I like. I think that he's got a group of coaches around him that works for him, I think. And he's got a game plan that is very predictable and but has been building since he started. So I think that's the critical thing, that he's had the vision and that the pieces of the puzzle are coming together. He seems to be sort of improving year on year, and I think he's been terrific, and he's certainly the right man, and he'll be there for quite a while, I expect.
I think I get what you say, about those words or the cliches, the Melbourne brand, because obviously at training, when pre-season training, when they're sort of formulating the game plan, that's the Melbourne brand, but then when you go into a year and you're struggling and you're not winning games and you can't sort of show off your brand because you're on the back foot and you're chasing tail, that brand doesn't come out. When you're 11-2 and you win the first 9 games, your brand is on display, and it's he doesn't need to talk about, we're not doing the Melbourne brand, because the Melbourne brand is there. So I guess when it's actually happening, you can see you don't need the cliches. But I guess when you're losing and it's not happening, and you say, well, we're not playing the Melbourne brand, it does sound like a cliche.
Particularly difficult. So in terms of the way that we play well, it requires everyone to be playing their role. We've talked about it before, and we'll talk about it again tonight. But, that all-team defence, everyone working hard, when that's not happening, well, the game plan doesn't work. So where does that leave Goody as the coach? Does he, what does he say? Look, it's not my fault. My players aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. Well, he's not going to do that, is he? So where does that leave him? It leaves him carrying the can. And he's had some challenges, and I think that, we talked last year about the intervention by the president and the criticism he copped after the Port game. Well, the sort of talk is that was a factor in Bartlett leaving. So I think that he's been under pressure for a long time. It's a tough gig being a coach at the Melbourne Footy Club. He seems to be really sort of finding his feet a bit. Well, more than a bit, I guess.
George, anything on Goody from you?
Yeah, I think it's important that we have a look at what other clubs are in, what situations the other clubs are in. There was a great article about a week ago from Wayne Campbell in The Age talking about Carlton's situation, and they did a review there in 2010, as it turned out, and they gave weighting. It was Ernst & Young gave weightings to what is a good coach and what's required. And the interesting thing that came out of the process was they only assigned 13% of 100% of what a good coach is needed to technical skills. In other words, footy skills. The real coach was about 25% leadership, personal qualities 20%, management 17%. Those are the sort of things that you need as a coach. And I think, as we talked about, by bringing in assistants like Choco and Uze and having that experience underneath, a lot of the day-to-day sort of roles that we desire as football supporters, that is the footy on the ground, can be delegated to others to leave the job for what Goodwin needs to do in the areas that he would excel. Unfortunately, all we as football supporters see is the on the ground stuff. But I think suddenly, particularly on match day, the responsibilities and the responses that occur is assigned to the assistants, whereas in the last couple of years, Goody's been responsible more for those sort of things. So the responses are assigned to the assistants, not through the assistants, which just leaves Goodwin free to do what he should be doing and where his qualities lie. So I think we've seen a lot more of that. And as a result, I mean, as I said before, it's easy when you're 11-2, but he's far more relaxed about it because he's doing what he's good at the moment. And we as supporters are seeing the results on the field, which is all we worry about ultimately at the end of the day. But it's about all these factors coming together, and Goody's position, I think, has been made so much more superior by the fact that he's got the right people behind him, the same way that Richmond did when they did a review with Hardwick. They brought in the right sort of assistants like Lepic, and I can't remember who else they brought in, to bolster the coach, to let the coach do what he has to do. And they got the results that they so desired. So I think we're in the right track with this.
And just one really quick comment to finish this bit up, Andy. I think the other thing for Goody, that the other challenge he's faced that he hasn't faced this year is that I think there's two types of coaches. There's the coach who is a systems coach like Hardwick and Goody, and then there's the coach who is more fluid. You know, there's always a system, I guess, but uses their pieces on game day to move them around and play different game to respond or modify their game to respond to the opposition from a tactical perspective. The systems coach will, of course, look to mitigate the strengths of the opposition, but will trust the system. Whereas a coach like Brad Scott will 1 week play fast against the Port and then another week try against Melbourne to take the speed out of the game because that favours us and has got an older team that can do it. The problem for a systems coach is if your system isn't working, you're exposed, but you have to trust it. And so, that's where the messaging starts to sound a bit, the cliches week in, week out. It keeps coming back to the system. And when you're 2019 and you're losing every second week and players aren't doing their part, it doesn't look great. But when it all comes together like it has for Richmond and it's starting to for the Dees, well, then exactly as George says, that pressure is taken off him. He doesn't have to worry about sort of defending the game plan or the players in it. And it's evident for his system, what needs to be in place, and that's the players. And so I think they're carrying, they've lifted their work rate this year, and it's taken the pressure off Goody, of course.
So there was a lot of pressure on Goody going into the season. He would have been the first the coach to cop all the heat had we sort of had a bit of failure to launch at the start of the year. Certainly, if we were 2-6 or 0-4 or 0-5, whatever number you want to give. But given the start to our year and a little bit of prognosticating by you guys, is there a scenario? Obviously, but I think if we actually miss the finals from here, he could be into trouble. But is there any other scenario where Goody doesn't keep his job? He's making the finals now from where we are now enough? Top 2, top 4? Does going out in straight sets change anything? Is Goody safe now, or what's?
He's as safe as he's ever going to be in his footy career, apart from winning a flag, I reckon, right at the moment. So, yeah, I think any talk to the contrary is sort of...
I'm not saying he's going to go during the year, but I'm saying come in the year.
He's safe for sure.
George. You've got to get over your MFCSS, Andy.
Oh, I'm just covering all
stop worrying about the worst scenario.
He's playing the demon's advocate.
I'm all doomsday all day, all year. All right, we'll move on from the coaching thing before I... okay, so you talked about the Melbourne Brand. I'll get you guys to give in just a few words, what is your Melbourne Brand? For me, this year, certainly it's that gut running to help out the defence, and that same gut running, going forward. It's the covering your man, not necessarily going up and tackling him, but covering him to slow it down, to give enough time for the defence to set up, and the opposition players just looking at a wall of demons and not being able to get past our miserly defence. For me, that's sort of the Melbourne Brand, and that's been evident for most of the games this year, particularly the games against the top teams. Big man?
A shout out to Access of Bob, who gave me some stats for tonight's show and a few of his thoughts, and I asked him what his definition of the identifiable Melbourne Brand was, and he said high pressure across the ground can withstand pressure, calm and calculated behind the ball and frenetic in front of it, which I thought was a really good definition. And for me, it's contests first, contest out, territory team that looks to get it in our forward half and keep it there.
George?
Yeah, not only that, I think it's built on a very frugal defence, helping our teammates in the contest at all times, quick play on when we've got the opportunity, and open sort of approach to the game, but playing the ball. We move the ball, getting the ball through the goals ultimately is what wins your games. So if you keep concentrating on playing the ball, you'll get the results. So, yeah, it's a very identifiable brand. And there was an interesting article in The Sun during last weekend, I think it was, which compared how close we are to what Richmond are even in this season in terms of the pressure in the forward half, the number of points from turnovers, the inside 50 differentials, the time in the forward half. It's all about this pressure. Where Richmond might be the best, Melbourne's the second best. Where Melbourne's the second best, Richmond's the third best. We're absolutely right alongside them in everything we do, and our game plans are so very similar. Let's hope that the results that Richmond have got over the last couple of years will result in the same sort of thing for us.
Similar with some interesting differences, but yeah, absolutely. Both based on the contest, both territory teams. And, the contest is obviously critical for both teams, that post-clearance contest in particular.
See, I see all these stats and I'm all heartened by it, the comparisons with Richmond and seeing us, we're at the top of all these stat things, and it gives me so much pleasure to see, and I get a bit of confidence going, and then we play games like we did against Collingwood, and we play games like Adelaide, and it just gets thrown out the window, and I think we're not going to win another game for the rest of the year. The life of a pessimistic Dees supporter. All right, Bim Man, this is where it's your time to shine. You are the tactics man. You started a thread called Tactics Game Plan and all that jazz. I can't say that I've read every page of that thread. I've read bits and pieces. Some of it goes over my head. But you are the master when it comes to this. I will let you take it away. What do you have to say?
I'll preface my comments by that certainly not the master, and there's so many on that thread. There's so many sort of really good thinkers about footy. I'm really just interested in it, and as we've talked about, I get really frustrated with the sort of lack of available analysis in the AFL, and even for tonight's show, preparing for it. It's just impossible to hunt around for good stats. So I, looked at Footy Wire, looked at AFL.com, bit here and a bit there. Footy Wire doesn't have. I couldn't find the contested ball ahead of the contest, post clearance contested differential. I couldn't find any of those things. I couldn't find in one spot. I think that's Champion Data. That whole sort of way Champion Data locks up the information to fans just drives me spare, and as does the complete lack of sort of interesting, useful analysis that the commentators give, with the exception, I have to say, of Daisy Pearce and the what's his name, the ex-Geelong player whose name escapes me, who isn't too bad either. So
Bartel.
Yeah, Bartel. Yeah, he's pretty good. So, but, you know, he hits his head against the wall trying to explain anything to Brian Taylor. So with that as a caveat, so by no means an expert, but and again, thanks back to Sir Bob for some of this stats. So just a really short summary of how I see the Dees game plan is we're a turnover team. When we score on the back of the turnover, that's been really a critical part of our game for a while, but it's really come to fruition this year. Our obvious strengths are Max, who, I think that we are guilty ourselves, even on the podcast, of underrating. Our incredible inside midfield, Clary Track. Great to have Viney back this week. We've really missed him, and I think that the way we've travelled is probably covered over how much so. And, of course, our intercepting defenders. Basically we want to pressure the opposition to kick the ball long, since we prioritise our structure behind the ball, even if we lose numbers around the ball. So we often, oppositions will bring one up to the contest and we don't. We keep them behind the ball and back our those inside bulls to win the contest, even if it's one against, 2 or 3 players. We can do that because we've got the best ruck who can control the stoppages and does so. We've got great mids. We've got 2, arguably All-Australian, maybe 3 if Viney gets a clear run at it, who can split the clearances even when outnumbered, as I say. So, you can see what Track's done this year. He's gone up a level, so's Oliver. We try to limit the quality of the opposition's clearances, so that meaning that even when they win it, we can pick it off, while maximising our own. And we've talked about that a number of times with Track and Clary, really hitting those stoppages and moving through quickly and getting ahead of the contest. So if you watch when we win a stoppage, a gold standard for us is it's ahead of the stoppage, whether that be a centre bounce or around the ground. And you've got a player like Track or Clary or, one of those halfback flankers moving at pace, running for 5-10 metres and then releasing it. So you're moving the ball 60-70 metres. We've talked about it all season, but the whole model doesn't work unless every member of the team's delivering the pressure that George noted before. And we really work hard to sort of pressure the opposition, but we've got a very strong tactical push, which it sort of seems to me it's really similar to basketball, the way we push our possessions and push opposition possessions towards the boundary, so that it slows down ball movement, and that they often end up having to kick the ball to leave Maxi who can drop back, and May and Rivers and those sorts of players. So we do a great job at stopping teams transition quickly. We like to play boundary side. I think it's really, for our game plan, where we're most similar to Richmond is our contest and our pressure, but the other one is we're a territory team. And that means that looks like a team that, especially this year, this has been a shift this year. It's been there all the time, but it's become more evident this year. We've got much more emphasis on getting the ball forward at all costs now. So we do much less chipping back side to side, certainly much less than, say, Collingwood did in that game last week. So we look to get it forward, and then once we do get it forward, the key is that we can trap it there. And the clip that we've got later of from Goody's presser today is really interesting. He's pretty dismissive of John Pierrick's question about, has Collingwood found the key to unlock the Dees? So, it's quite a interesting batting it back. But basically his point, as we'll hear, is that, the bottom line is in that game we didn't bring the all-team pressure. And it's interesting because he makes a comment about, in particular, the forward half. So we didn't trap the ball in the forward half, so we couldn't get the game on our terms. So when the game's on our terms, we're a territory team, as I said. We get it forward of centre and we keep it there, and we make it really, really difficult for the opposition to get it back out. And, we've seen that time and time again. I think back to that Hawthorn game, there was a period there where they just could not clear the ball. No matter what they did, they kept on bouncing it back in. I think it was that play where Frosty was into our players, and the ball kept on coming back to Frost because it would get cleared out and come straight back in on Frost's head. So, in simple terms, I think that's what our game plan looks like. And it's been, I think the other thing that George picked up before is I think we've simplified the game plan this year. So it's a relatively simple game plan. I've heard a couple of players say that it's understandable. And I think it really, sort of looping back to a point that George made earlier, is the messaging's been really clear. So I think they've stripped it back and trying to make it as clear as possible. And players seem to be responding, and it's a really predictable game plan.
The keys, we've got notes here, the key stats that are indicators of our game plan, that our game plan is working. Have you been able to get
so I think
deep dive on that?
Yeah, so the key stats that when our game's working, I think there's a number of key stats. And I think the thing about stats is that they're indicators. They're not, they're a symptom, not a cause. If things are going badly and if they're going well, they're not the reason we're going well. They're just the evidence that we're going well. And again, it's sort of my frustration is I'd love to know what the club's stats and KPIs are to do this. So you're sort of guessing a little bit. But the big one for us is that we're plus 10.3 in contested possessions per game in differential. So it's third overall in the differential overall. And we're first in contested possessions per game in total. They're critical. That's really our sort of heartbeat of our whole model, really. And what's interesting is that those numbers are our contested ball. We're the best contested ball. Brisbane's and is right up there as well, and so are the Tigers. But Brisbane, for instance, they bring an extra up to the contest, and the Dogs do as well, who are also an excellent contested ball team. So we're right up the top of the contested charts, first in contested possessions per game, despite not bringing an extra up to the contest. And I reckon that's a really important point because we're often outnumbered at the stoppage, meaning that, we've got our tracks and when Viney comes back in and our mids are beating, one mid's beating 2-3 players, and you will have heard a few times track mentioned at least once, and some of the other players is a focus on one player at the tackling, so not multiple players to the ball, and we're still winning the contested ball, which says something about the maturity and strength of our midfield. Post-clearance contested possessions, I couldn't find those numbers, but I'm pretty sure we're number one in the AFL in that. And it's a fundamental of our game, and Hardwick and the Tigers as well. And Hardwick pointed that out in the game that we beat them in, that they pride themselves on winning those post-clearance contested possessions and just couldn't against the Dees when we got going. And that's a really critical stat. And we back ourselves to win those post-clearance contested possessions, whether we're defending, if they win it and we're defending that post-clearance, or when we're attacking and we're going forward, we back ourselves to win that contest, which means that we can just kick it long forward and with a fair degree of confidence that even though the ball's out in space and it's contested, it hasn't gone to one of our players the way, for instance, the Lions like to maintain possession through mark and kicking, that we'll back ourselves in to win that contest. And so, you get multiple players running towards it and you get that flow. The big one that's come up this year is something that we've been building for a long time is our intercepts. We're plus 7.3 per game, which is off the charts, number one in the AFL by a mile. And our opponents kick the ball back to us because we're so solid behind the ball. But my point before is we don't bring an extra up to the stoppage. That player sits back in defence and helps mop it up. We concede the second least number of marks inside 50. So not only are we intercepting, opposition forwards struggle to mark against us. One, because, we've obviously got May and Lever, who are both excellent, and I think Petty's been good in that regard, and Tomlinson before him in that position. But again, the key factor is our all-team pressure and defence puts pressure on that kick inside 50. And I think that one of the interesting things that reflects that is our preparedness to allow the ball to come inside our 50. We're not scared of the opposition getting it inside 50, who, as opposed to, say, the Lions, who work really hard to stop the ball getting inside their 50. And we're the fourth in the AFL in the rebound 50s, which I thought was really interesting stat because If you compare that with the other top teams, so we're fourth in the AFL in rebound 50s. The Lions are 12th, the Tigers are 15th, the Eagles are 16th, the Cats are 17th, and the Dogs are 18th. The only sort of teams in the top 8 around our mark that are around us on the same ladder are the Swans are third on that ladder and Port are fifth. So that means we and the number 1 and 2 teams, so the team that concede that have the most rebound 50s are the Hawks and then the Suns. But I assume that's a function of the fact that they have so many, they concede lots of inside 50s. So it's a weighted numbers thing. So we let the ball come in and then we rebound. So that's a big point of difference from Richmond. I think they don't like it either. They to avoid it, they still try to mop it up. But they've been down in that stat this year. So we're okay with the ball coming inside our 50, as I was saying, assuming there's the right pressure on that last kick going in and we back ourselves to win that contest. We're 15th in uncontested possessions per game. Again, that's a function of our territory game and move it forward mantra. So, instead of chipping it around, back and forth like Collingwood did and having a huge number of uncontested possessions, we're kicking it 40, 50 metres down the line, backing ourselves in to win that contest. We're second in contested marks per game, which really jumped out at me. Third in terms of the differential stat in contested marks with 2.8 contested marks a game, which just shows how well we're marking around the ground with our big forwards pushing up T-Mac and Maxi. And, of course, Max comfortably leads the AFL in contested marks, and he's critical to the way we move the ball and transition it. And as Axis of Bob points out, he's a real Mr. Fix-It. And they use him to break a game up, either going forward or putting him a kick behind play. And he's a really important element in the way that we make it difficult for oppositions to transition, because if they have a model moving up one wing, for instance, and he's in the middle of that play, then they've got to think about sort of, do they go around him or do like Hawthorn did in that game where they just kicked it to him all day. So, there's some of the key stats that jumped out for me that I think the club probably look at in terms of, when we're on or not on.
So what's been the impetus for this change this year? Is it just the maturity? Is the message sinking in? What's happened? Because obviously they've been trying to do this the last few years, but obviously hasn't been as successful. Why is it working now?
I think it's pretty simple. You hear the messages from the players. It's been pretty simple, clear messages from the players about what's different. And I think the number one thing is all team commitment to that game plan and that all team defence. It's just super critical. You hear this over and over again. Two things is more selfless, much more team orientated. You've heard players talk about what a good teammate looks like. You see players like Cozzy picking up Fritter after he's kicked the goal off the ground. You see the small things like Track, washing the milk off Chandler. Those sorts of team first, good teammate actions they've been really focused on. I think big factor is maturity. The biggest change probably from a tactical thing, I think, has been the clearance setup. So that's definitely changed in terms of being much more, not being concerned about losing the clearances in the way that we would, not having that as one of the key performance indicators. And I couldn't find stats on it, but I feel like that we're more prepared to handball our way forward and out of trouble. I'd be interested in your guys' perception on that. Sort of the Tigers game was a good example, although, an outlier because we had heaps of handballs in that game. But, if I'm thinking about some of our terrific goals where we've moved the ball from one end of the ground to the other that have involved big chains of handballs, first of all to get out of trouble and then to move it forward.
The Brisbane game, there was that one.
Yeah, exactly. And I reckon, and again, I couldn't find the stats for this, but my sense is we switch less and use the corridor less, more risk averse generally. As we talked about last week, we play pretty low, high percentage footy in terms of ball movement, and we're definitely more boundary side. And I reckon we use the corridor less. It was interesting watching all of those KO minis back to back. I reckon we use the corridor less in the last 4 or 5 games than we did even at the beginning of the season. I think they're some of the key changes.
You got a point a bit later on just about that ball movement around, sort of around the boundary, and we always seem to go to the left side, camera side of the ground. Is that predictable ball movement? And also that kick into the pockets as well. Seems to me it's very predictable. I would like to see it mixed up a bit, but what do I know? We're 11-2. What do you say to that?
That's definitely been a feature of the game, and I think it goes back to that sort of idea that we've stripped things back and made it as I guess easy to follow as possible. We're Spargo said as much on the interview I listened to today that sort of repetition of things, he can look up and know that who's going to be there, and so therefore it's more likely he's going to hit that target because it's sort of he's confident in everyone's in their position. That predictability is a really important part. It's interesting you should say that about the sort of changes, because we talked, I think it was Red and Blue Beard in the chat room a few weeks ago asked about why don't they go either side. And in the Brisbane game, you might remember that out of the blue, May elected to go to the right side and kicked it to Rivers, who was 1 out against 3, and everyone who was on the left side of the ground had to sweep across. And Rivers did really well to halve the contest and get it out for a boundary line throw in. Otherwise, he would have had a turnover, would have come straight back in. But it was a sort of a shock even watching it. So everyone was well out of position, and it was just lucky we didn't get a turnover. So they're super predictable. And the other one is the kicking to the pockets. I know it frustrates a lot of fans thinking, why don't they kick to the middle? But, you can see the team rule is you kick to the boundary line, and that's what they do. And I think predictability is a big part of the way they're playing.
Yeah, but that has the reverse effect is that oppositions can get keyed into exactly what you're doing. I get what you're saying. It makes it predictable. Everyone knows what their role is and where we're going to be going and where to look and where to, when they got the ball, they can look up and they know someone's going to lead that way. But the oppositions are going to work out that's where they're going. They're going to set up that way defensively, and they'll know exactly where we're going to be kicking. And because we're not deviating from that, that could be a problem. Now that we're the hunt, we're the hunted.
So Maxie said, and that's obviously a theme. And if you listen to it, if you miss as many player interviews as I do, the theme is we're the hunters still. Like and Goody said it as well. It was funny in that clip before. Maxie said that's very true. It's very predictable to the opposition. It's very predictable to fans. But there's 2 things there. One is that, sure, it's predictable, but as I said before, we back ourselves to win the post clearance possession. Then, whether it's contested or uncontested, we back ourselves to win it. And Goody was clearly frustrated, even still this morning, about our lack of forward pressure. So that's the first thing. Even if the opposition know it's going to go to a certain spot, we back ourselves to win that footy, and we're number 1 in that stat. So we generally win it. The other thing is that, sure, the opposition can structure a response to that, but then they're playing on our game plan. They're responding to us. They're being reactive, not proactive. So that's exactly what Goody wants. That's what all coaches want. They want the game played on their terms. You hear it all the time. And so if they're mixing up it's a bit like, whether they put someone on lever or try not to play through lever or, to try and minimise the amount of intercept marks that we take. Sure, you can do that, but it's it's inherently a negative thing to do to try and stop to stop a defensive model. So, yeah, of course they can do it, but it means potentially moving a player from an offensive position to do that. And so what if they know it's going to go to the pocket and they can set up? do they counter that by bringing a player away from a stoppage and then putting them down in the back pocket? Well, if they do, well, we win because we're more likely to win the stoppage clearance up the ground. So, I think Goody'd be more than happy for the opposition to know what we're doing.
All right, we have a caller on the line. Good evening. Welcome to the Demon Lamb podcast. Who am I talking to?
Yeah, hey, this is Garbo. We called a few weeks back after one of our wins. But, I was just calling about the bit of the tactics, I guess, specifically around opposition kick-ins. So I managed to get up to the game for Sydney the other week, and one thing that stuck out was we've just allowed Collingwood to get that first kick, which got them right up to the 50 on the wing, and we didn't look like we were even considering stopping them do that. And then it's only one kick from there, particularly at the SCG, to get it into the top of the 50 on for their forwards, and that was really the difference that day, I thought. Just wondering if you had any thoughts on that, or if you had been noticing that yourself.
Big man, you want to take that one? Tactical. Things?
We talked a little bit about that last week. Actually, one thing I'd say is that I don't know that they let them kick to the pocket normally. They always give that one up, and they're happy for the opposition to kick from the kick out and put it laterally across. They'll give that up all day. At the SCG, as you say, it's a much narrower ground, and we talked last week about the benefit that was for Collingwood, because you're right, then you get your kick from the wing, and instead of being at the top of the 50-metre arc where we set up our intercept marking, you get it inside 50 into that funny sort of zone 30, 40 metres out, which we don't set up in. So, again, looking at those goals, so we give up a lot of goals in that pocket because that's not where we're set up. But I'd say that's more the point. We'll hear Goody's talk to almost that exact point, Garbo, is that we just didn't work hard defensively enough. So I don't think we give up that kick. We hardly ever give up a free kick outside the 50-metre arc. We're generally pressuring that one. We give them up all day for the ones inside 50, because then we set up ahead of it. But I think that, you didn't need to read much between the lines. Goody was pretty frustrated at our lack of run and defensive effort. And again, he made the point of criticising the forward defensive effort, that's who's stopping that kick. It's your forwards getting across to making that kick difficult. I think that's what we did really well against Brisbane in the second half. We stopped allowing that easy kick and we stopped allowing Brisbane to get the ball out easily. But we were pretty lazy defensively in that Pies game, and it really, you don't get that right, it looks like, well, how come they're transitioning the ball so easily? And I think that's what the case was in the Pies game. And you're exactly right, Garbo. It's totally exacerbated by how short that ground is, because 2.5 kicks and it's up the other end.
Well, thankfully, we probably don't have to play in Sydney for the rest of the year. Apologies to all our the Demon Sydney fans, but I'm not a big fan of the SCG. Don't mind the Giant Stadium, but Garbo, is there anything else?
Probably just one other thing, which was just on what Jack Viney will probably bring in the second half of the year, as far as how that will change how we set up, perhaps. We've obviously been using Harms in a tagging role. If Viney then plays that, or we just don't tag altogether, and just what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, Big Man, how are we going to set up now with Viney? He's been confirmed he will play this week. I think Sparrow will probably come out for him, but how does that work with Harms, if Harms does stay in the team?
I think that Harms will tag when there's a player that we want to pin down. Like, he might go to Parrish this week. He'd be the perfect player for Parrish, I reckon. Parrish is, getting crazy numbers. I think he must be averaging more than 35 possessions.
Yeah, he's getting close to 40, yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. So I think they'll set him on Harms is, I think, best 22. Goody uses him. I think he's a player who can rotate off the bench. He can go forward and play half-forward flank. He can sort of play defensive forward. He's exactly the sort of player that Goody loves to move around. I think Viney's huge. And it was interesting hearing Goody today, no hesitation to say he's straight back into the side. And that's a long time, what is it? That's 2 months he's not played. He's coming straight back into what's going to be a really important game. We've got to get this win under the belt. I think the big change will mean is that, and it's going to have a bit of a domino effect and a really positive one, is that it will allow Jordan to go back to the role that he was playing, which is that sort of half-back flanker mid that was an outside player. He's really carried the load for that sort of really defensive mid who tackles hard. Like his tackle numbers have been off the charts, Jordan, since he's come into the midfield. But, he's a young player in his first full season, so he'll really he'll be a better player back out on the midfield as good as back out playing as an outside player as good as he's been. And it was interesting. Goody had a sort of interesting turn of phrase on the presser today. He said, that I think Viney adds a stiffness to the side. I'm not quite sure what that means, but I'm guessing it means he sort of adds a bit of grunt to that midfield. And I think opposition, other mids are going to hate him being back in because he's such an aggressive tackler. He's so hard at the player, and we really missed him. That I think, again, I said before, the fact that we've been winning papered over how much we've missed him, particularly as that sort of defensive inside mid who can tackle and sort of win a lot of those sort of 50-50 balls.
All right, well, thank you, Garbo. Thanks for your call, and we'll chat with you soon. Thank you. All right, moving on. Well, maybe we'll go to the team defence now. Do you want me to play this sound clip from Goody now? Or
might as well just pick up those points. It's a good time to play now, I think.
All right.
But the Magpies sort of used the game plan, Simon, I guess, where they tried to make your defenders accountable and leave it a few times, I guess, sort of caught a little bit no man's land. Is that something you sort of zeroed in on heading back into the season? Perhaps teams will try and use those tactics again?
We just didn't defend very well, John, right across the board. If you give teams time and space, they can do whatever they want with the ball. So, teams are going to look at us differently and try and find ways to play against us, just like we do against every opposition we play. But, that's something that we'll deal with. But, right across the board from the Collingwood game, we just needed to defend to a way higher level, especially in that forward half of the ground and through the middle of the ground.
I thought George is going to take the sort of discussion on team defence, but I thought that was just really interesting. I loved how frustrated he sounded and sort of almost dismissive of, that question about did Collingwood unpick our lock or give us some sort of template for other teams to sort of play us. And he said, well, basically poo-pooed and said, well, sure, do your damnedest, but we didn't bring our all-team defence and pressure. And again, as I noted before, he made a point of saying the forwards didn't criticise the defenders, the forwards and the mids. So.
George, anything you want to add on defence?
Yeah, I'll just reiterate a point I think I made last week, that team defence isn't about that back six alone. It's very similar to either a three-quarter press in basketball, where you're expecting the people at the top of the key or up around the halfway mark in basketball, not necessarily to get the ball off the opposition, but to force them into a position where they're going to be under pressure when they're passing. So what we see is normally, and we didn't see it in the Collingwood game, and that's what Garbo was talking about, we gave them that easy kick out to the pocket, but there was no pressure on that player in the pocket. They were then allowed to run another 15 metres before they kicked the ball. Whereas in the Brisbane game, we were pressurising right from the very start, forcing him out to the side, forcing him to kick to that sort of wing position where we had the Jacksons and the Gorns sitting and waiting, and even if we didn't win it there, it would finish in a contested situation. So the defence starts right from the forward line. It's not just the back six. If they get through that next layer, then you get back to the levers and Mays sitting in the half-back line waiting to intercept. But again, it's all about the ball being under pressure when the opposition are trying to bring it down the ground. Now, the major difference in basketball, of course, is if you achieve in basketball, you try to basically defend half the ground, whereas in AFL, keeping the ball in your forward line is really critical because that's where you score the goals. So if the forwards aren't doing their work, you're not only scoring, but you're giving the opposition plenty of opportunity to move the ball freely up the ground. And that's exactly what Goody said in that sound clip, that if you let the opposition do that, then they'll have a field day doing what they want to. You've got to keep the pressure on them, make it difficult to move the ball, and put it in a position, and a predictable position for us, where we can either intercept or we can bring it to a contested situation. So, the defence is across the whole ground, not just starting at the 50-metre arc in the back line.
Yeah, George, that's a perfect summary. And Axis and Bob gave me some notes on that too, which is very similar. And he makes an interesting point about what you're saying about the controlling of it. And that's a real basketball thing too, isn't it? Is that team defence is a really big part of how we control the game and get it on our terms, so to speak. Because if, Axis makes the point that you're defending the ground, as you're saying, George, as a collective rather than a series of one-on-ones. So then the opposition have to choose then, do they take a risky kick? And then, as you say, that creates a turnover option, or do they do what so often seems to be the case, like the Dogs game's the classic example of it, a really attacking, aggressive team that just stop taking that risky kick, and because of how good our all-team defence was, and so ends up going conservative and goes for the easy kick, but that's to usually to a spot that's not going to hurt us. So it plays into our hands, and Axis Bob also makes the sort of point that each player needs to be to the best incremental benefit of the team, even if it reduces their own direct contribution, which is a point Goody made about how important it is to assume their game to the team. We've made that sort of observation of Gus this year, how much more team-orientated he is, and that's really about that running. So, as Bob notes, that you can stand 90 metres away on the opposite side of the ground. If you do it properly and all your teammates do, then the ball may not come near you. But if you or one of your teammates doesn't, either through poor pressure or missed tackle, not being in the right spot, not playing your role in that system, or getting sucked up to the contest, then suddenly a gap opens up on the field and everyone looks stupid because the ball suddenly gets moved super easy. And that happened to us all the time last year. Remember the Dogs game? Suddenly you think, well, have we got one less player out here? And really that the team defence sort of, it allows us to control the game and as I said, get it on our terms. But I think a big part of it, George, is trust, isn't it? You've really, and that's really evident in basketball from watching a bit of basketball my son plays at rep level, is they just got to trust each other that everyone's doing their job.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. The other advantage of that sort of approach, but coming from the basketball background as well, is that the first pressure on the opposition bringing the ball down the field, and the same absolutely applies in the AFL, is you funnel the opposition to one side of the court or down a particular wing. You're actually controlling the ball about where it's going to go. And as Axis and Bob said, you can be 90 metres away from the ball, sitting in the right position, but you're forcing the opposition to go down the other wing, for example, and that's where your defensive structures are set up. So, you need that pressure right from the very start. It may not be obvious to people as spectators, but you're forcing the opposition into a position that they wouldn't ordinarily want to be.
Yeah, and basketball is a really great analogy for that all-team defence, George, because watching, for instance, my son train is the coach will stop everyone. But because they're courtside, he can go stand next. He can take 2 steps onto the court and say, look, you're standing out of position. What are you doing? You've got to be on this spot. You can't do that on the footy field. But it's equally important. And, if you get that chain breaks down, it just gets through so easily. And everyone looks like they're sort of out of whack. But the main thing from our game plan, apart from the zoning and everyone sort of running into that space and that movement as a collective, is, as Goody noted, that if you're not putting pressure on that kick, the person who kicks the ball, well, then any AFL player is going to cut you up. So, except for Frost, for instance. I think that one of the interesting things tactically that we're doing this year a little bit different is that, as you note, George, we're playing boundary side all the time, pretty much, and we're forcing the opposition to play boundary side. And one of the really interesting ways they're doing that this year is that if you look when the opposition have they get a free kick or a mark on the wing, the guy stands on the mark, and then about 20 metres on the inside of the corridor, sort of on the diagonal, another player will stand. When we're not on, that player's not there. But when we're focused, there's that player there, which forces they almost always play on to get that extra 2 steps. And the Lions did it to us all the time, but they play on to the boundary side in that scenario. So it's predictable to us because they then can only go down the line, which means that when we come across and spoil, we're hitting it over the line, which we so often do. But what's interesting is that if you watch our games, the stand doesn't seem to affect us. And the reason that is, I reckon, is because we almost always play on to the boundary line side. So we force the opposition to play on to the boundary line side, and we choose to play on to the boundary line side. By that I mean the player's on the mark and he can't move. They get that 3-4 steps that, and then when they do kick the ball, they haven't got a player pressuring them, so they can be much more accurate. They can get much more depth, and that's what the Lions did to us. They got their whole game is built around getting those marks on the wing, and then playing on and having no pressure on that last kick in and kicking inside their 50-metre arc for one of their big forwards to mark it. So that pressure on that kick is super critical. But that interesting sort of model of playing down the boundary line that we've been doing is all about controlling the way the game's played.
So in terms of our tactics and game plan, what can be improved, Bin Man? There's got to be room for improvement. Where can we improve to make us even more formidable going into the run home?
Oh, look, I think I don't know about so much tactically, but what can be improved in terms of where we go. I think we need to sort out, what's our best forward line look like. I think the sort of, the model for the season's a bit like NFL, is that you play your home and away and then your season starts again. The critical time really now is through probably from round 16 to the end of the thing. So for me, that's a really key thing, that we get that forward line settled and our best forward line. It worries me a bit, the good small and medium goal kickers. I think we've still got a weakness there. I forget the player Brisbane, the young player, 22-year-old or something, who kicked 3 goals. George, what's his name?
Was that Bailey?
Is it Bailey or the guy who kicked the goal after the siren in, I think, the Magpies game? He's exactly the player that worries us. And whilst Hibbard's been good this year on the smaller, he's played on Betts, as we talked about, and Papley, as we talked about last week. I still worry about that medium goal kicker. The otherwise, a couple of years ago, the Jets would have taken. Our starts haven't been fantastic. I do wonder if that's a little bit about sort of getting the pieces of the puzzle, and it takes a while to get that in place. And I think, maybe the Dogs game is the only full quarter game we've had where I felt like we've been in control for the full game. And then the other one, I think, is that it's exactly what George was talking about before, is still kicking is important. And whilst we're good, it's improved, and there's been some definite improvements in that space, 100%. But interestingly, we're ranked number 1 in clangers per game and tracks the number 1 in the league, or at least number 1 at the Dees. That's partly a function of the way we play that territory. You're kicking it long, so you're going to get more clangers with the way we're playing. We're not chipping it around, so and we win that post clearance, but still it would be good to clean that up. So they're not really sort of tactical stuff. I don't know about what from that perspective what would, but there are things definitely we can improve on 100%.
Well, let's move on. Here's the fun part of the night. It's fair to say that I've given the AFL website's ladder predictor a good workout, and I'll preface all of my predictions with the fact that there are so many combinations and potential outcomes that can have a variety of other outcomes and can impact any of my predictions. Anyone who's watching Loki with the multiverses, as you are, Bin Man, things can spiral very quickly. I've outlined a number of scenarios, and in fact, any of the results, the results of some of the games this very week can put a dent in anything that I'm going to talk about now. I think this week in particular can have a huge bearing on what happens going forward. I've outlined a number of scenarios for different results of the Demons games. I've only really factored in the Dees winning or losing various games. For the most part, unless otherwise stated, all the other matches and results are based on the current higher-ranked team winning. For the bottom half of the ladder, I haven't factored in home ground advantage, as only in extreme circumstances will a bottom 8 team winning a game that they weren't expected to have an impact on the ultimate outcome. For example, the Suns beating Adelaide, and I don't recall if they play each other again, but suffice to say it's not a concern to us or this exercise, no matter what happens in that game. In terms of top 8 teams playing each other, for the most part, I don't take into account home ground advantage, and when I do, I'll state that. For example, this week's West Coast versus Bulldogs game and Brisbane versus Geelong. Mostly I've gone with the current ladder positions and have only really focused on us either winning 1, 2 or 3 games against our other current top 8 teams. And I've also included a couple scenarios where we also lose to Essendon and GWS. Suffice to say, if we win all 4 games against the top 8 teams or win all 9 remaining games, we'll finish top. So I didn't factor that in. So we've got 9 remaining games. 4 of them are against current top 8 teams in Port Adelaide away, West Coast away, Bulldogs at the G, and Geelong in Geelong. We also have 2 matches against contenders for a top 8 spot in Essendon and GWS, which are coming up in the next 2 weeks. So we'll know pretty quickly the results of that. The rest of our matches against Hawthorn at the G, Gold Coast in Gold Coast, and Adelaide at the G. For the most part, I've penciled in wins against those latter 3 teams, but we're Melbourne, and that's not a given, unfortunately. And I will also say the ladder predictor does allow you to tinker with percentages. I thought that adds a whole new layer of things, so I didn't touch it. I believe it's a 15-point default, so that's what I've gone. So that can affect, obviously we'd like to beat Gold Coast by 75 points, but given our history this year, we haven't put teams away. But it would help us if we are going to lose a couple of matches against some of the top 4 teams, hopefully by not too much. It's going to help if we give Hawthorn a pantsing, as well as Gold Coast, and maybe give Adelaide some revenge for the game earlier in the season or a couple of weeks ago. So percentage obviously will be a factor, or could be, but some of the results we'll see. I'll go through. Well, let me grab my thing. So
no one can accuse you, Andy, of not having tackled this particular part of the show with without full intent.
I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got lots of pages and pages of things here. So the first one I did. This is the Dees losing all of our top 4 games, and when I say top 4 games, it's the games against the other top 4 teams. So if the Dees just lose those 4 games against those teams, we win the other 5. We're going to finish 5th on 16 wins. The team above us is Port on 17 wins, and below us is Sydney on 15 wins. So that has us losing those 4 games and if all other results go as expected, as I said, that's where we're going to finish. And it looks like we will end up playing West Coast at the G in that scenario. So, I mean, you guys, we want to finish top 4. That's a given, correct?
Yeah.
Because if we want to do that,
top 2 would be. I think we really realistically we want to finish top 2 to take travelling interstate out of the equation.
Well, I'll tell you something, and we'll get to it in a second, but I think the only way we can really finish top 2 is almost winning all 4 of those games against top teams. But I'll get into that in a minute. So the Dees losing all games, and now I've taken into account, and it's basically only with this week. This current week, I'll just go through this. The top 8 teams, the current top 8 teams, don't play each other. I'll tell you now, don't play each other a lot in the remainder of the season. We're playing 4 top 8 teams. This week we've got quite a few games. We've got Brisbane, Geelong, Port and Sydney, West Coast and Bulldogs. In every other round 16 is only Sydney and West Coast. Round 17, only Bulldogs and Sydney. Round 18, Richmond and Brisbane. Round 19, Geelong and Richmond. And then there's not another top 8 clash besides our games until round 23, where Brisbane play West Coast and Bulldogs play Port. So there's not a lot of opportunity for those teams that we're competing with to start knocking each other off. With that in mind, this is the same 5 wins, 4 losses for the remainder of the year, also has us finishing 5th, and that's with Bulldogs losing to West Coast. I'm taking into account the home teams, and Brisbane beating Geelong. With that scenario, with Bulldogs and Geelong even losing this week, we still finish 5th if we lose those 4. So, not grim. We've got to start winning some games, boys. If we win 2 of the top 4 games, I've done a few scenarios. If we beat Port and Bulldogs and lose to West Coast and Geelong, we finish 3rd. Third, playing the Bulldogs. All right, you'd like that. That's not bad. That's almost a top. That's equivalent of top 2. I'd assume, would they play that at the G?
They'd have to. Two Melbourne-based sides.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've lost you. Who are we playing?
We're playing Bulldogs.
Bulldogs. Well, yeah, I reckon we won't play Whitten Oval, will we?
We're not. No, but Marvel Stadium. Yes. So, all right. I'll go into the thing. We beat Port and Geelong, but lose to West Coast and Bulldogs. Also finish 3rd, but we play the Cats this time.
Oh, good Lord. Imagine that. The talk about having to play them down at Geelong. God.
Well, no, they won't do that. They can't get a home fight. We'll have played them the week before, mind you, as well.
Well, Cats are such a dirty team. I wouldn't put it past them to do a little COVID scare and have 7,000 fans come.
Well, they'll ask for a home final, but I doubt if they come up against they can't get it against a Melbourne team. So again, with the 2 wins and, hold on one sec. Did I have this note here? Oh, okay. So that scenario, the couple of scenarios that I just did where we win 2 games, 2 of the top 4 games, we still retain 3rd, even in these scenarios where we win 2 against top 4 teams, we can still lose to Essendon and GWS. And still finish 3rd, which is remarkable. So even beating Port and West Coast but losing to Bulldogs and Geelong, and we can retain 3rd, losing to Essendon and GWS. Again, remarkable. And same with wins against Bulldogs and Geelong, but losses against Port and West Coast. But with that, all right. So if we beat Bulldogs and Geelong but lose to Port and West Coast, we end up equal with Geelong and Bulldogs.
But with a better percentage.
Well, at the moment on my ladder, we finished third, but it all depends on we'd need to have the good wins against the other teams. Again, I'm not factoring in anything but a 15-point win or loss either way. So our percentage dips below Geelong in this scenario, but we'd hope for a nice win against a Hawthorn or a Gold Coast, and that can put us, well, depending on how much we win those games, we could still finish first or second. So there's, we want to win. We want to win those games against all the lower teams. We don't want to drop any of them like we have, but we're in a good place, winning to only 2 of the top 4. So I had other scenarios where we, other combinations of Bulldogs, West Coast, and losses to Port and Geelong. We don't really need to go into them because they all sort of end up the same. Now, if we win one game. So that was us winning. Those scenarios was us winning 2 of the top 4 games. If we just beat Port, and if we just beat Port, we can still finish third as well. So even with one game, but we then quite far away from 1 and 2 because we finish on 17 and the top 2 teams finish on 19. But the Bulldog, if we don't beat Port and we beat, say, the Bulldogs, but only beat one of the top 4 teams, finish 4th because we'll drop below Port. So it's quite important that we beat Port if we only win one game. That's the key there. It's the same scenario if we just beat West Coast. If we just beat Geelong, we'll end up finishing 4th. So then I guess we'll end up playing either Bulldogs or Geelong, which 4th isn't so bad as long as that. We just don't want to finish in a 3rd position and a team like Brisbane or Port slips into 2nd. But it doesn't look like, based on what I've gone through, it really looks like if we're not up in the 1 or 2 position, it's going to be Geelong or Bulldogs. So 3rd position and arguably 4th is still going to get us a Melbourne home game and give us a same shot as if we finish on 1st or 2nd. All right. If we lose all remaining games, this is my doomsday scenario. So based on where we are now with no other games having been played now, and this is based on the current higher teams winning games across the board, we will finish 9th. Yes, and because the Giants drew that game against North, they'll be half a game ahead of us.
And if that happens, I'm going to blame you. There's no other way.
Yeah. You're definitely responsible for this.
Yeah, forget Norm Smith. If that happens, then it's the Andy Demonland curse.
If this is my full doomsday scenario, so that's losing all remaining games, all current teams win, GWS get in, but there's also, when I factored that in, I think Essendon are actually going to win a few more games than I gave them credit for based on the way I was doing it. I think Essendon would slide in ahead of us there as well. So we're in trouble if we lose all games. I did some scenarios where we only win 4 games for the year and only winning the remaining 4 games. And the 4 games I did were Hawthorn, Gold Coast, Adelaide and GWS. We still finish, in this scenario, we still finish 5th, having us playing the Eagles. If we only win 3 games for the remainder of the year, that was Hawthorn, Gold Coast, Adelaide, we finish 7th. And in this scenario, playing Sydney in Sydney. If we only win 2 games, Hawthorn and Gold Coast, we finish 8th. And this is where you don't know what's going to happen because we finished 13th, a game and a half
to the other scenarios.
a game and a half ahead of GWS and 2 games ahead of Essendon. But obviously, I think Essendon are going to win a few more games than I've given them credit for based on thing. If we only win 1 game, say Gold Coast, in this scenario, we finish half a game ahead of GWS. We finish 8th. So we can still get into the finals, boys and girls, by winning 1 game. That's the takeaway out of all this. But look.
So Andy, I've got everything up to. I've looked at the ladder predictor. So what can I ask you? What's your prediction where we will finish after all of that? What's your optimistic? What's your conservative finishing position for us?
Look, I think we should beat Gold Coast, Hawthorn, Adelaide. We should beat GWS at the G. Essendon, I'm not as confident with. I think. I don't know if I've just fallen into the media's trap, but they're the darling at the moment, and I'm giving them more value than they're worth. I don't know, but I'm worried about them. I'm worried about the Port in Port. If we were playing Port at the G, be less worried. I think I could get a win out of that. I'm worried about West Coast in West Coast. Obviously, Geelong in Geelong, I'm worried about. I think we could lose 5. I think we might be 4 and 5. So we're either 5 and 4 or 4 and 5. I think I don't know. I'm very pessimistic going into the and I don't know if it's just a result of the last match that I watched us play.
So where we on that
we're going to finish fourth, anywhere between 3rd and 5th.
3rd and 5th.
And we might win. We might beat the Bulldogs.
Can we say 4th then? So I did the ladder predictor and we finished 1st. That was really optimistic. So we could finish between 3rd and 5th. Can we call that 4th? That might be.
Yeah, 3rd and I think we can finish anywhere between 3rd and 5th. I don't think we're going to finish.
And I think we'll finish
1st or 2nd. And I think we can knock some teams off here and there, but I'm just worried we can knock teams off, but then we can lose to an Adelaide or a Hawthorn, and it cancels out the good win we have in Perth, or the gutsy win we have in Port Adelaide. I don't trust us yet.
I think that was a very healthy process for you. And I'm just looking at the running sheet.
I was probably the worst guy to do this because, the negative aspects of my Melbourne Football Club supporting nature have come out. But realistically, I think we'll finish somewhere 3rd to 5th.
As long as we get a home final, it's the running street. I just noticed that there's a typo. It's a ladder predication, which is quite a appropriate typo. So, what about you, George? Did you do one? And if so, where'd you have us finishing?
No, I'm not a betting man, and I don't like looking into the future all that much. I think I just look at what we've got as a team. We're sitting at 11-2. We've beaten basically all the top teams that we've had to play, and those very same top teams are the ones that we're going to be facing at the end of the year. I was heartened when I read some comment on Demonland during the week where in premiership years the Tigers went 8-1, 9-0, 7-2, and the Dogs went 6-3 in their year that they won. And I think we'll do something similar. We're just a better team. It doesn't matter whether your predictions are based on past performance, and I think we've got current performance is what we should be going on. So I'm much more bullish. I think we'll still finish either first or second, because we'll simply not worry about whether we'll beat these top 4 teams. By one. Win one of those games, I think we'll win 3 out of the 4, and you'll be stuck in position 1 and 2, and we won't give the opportunities to people like Adelaide the second time round, and we won't give the opportunities to Hawthorn. second time round, we'll just the steamroller will just keep rolling on as far as this team's concerned.
And I reckon that's an interesting point, George. When you said those numbers for the Dogs and Tigers, do you mean in the last
9 rounds? Yeah, the last 9 rounds.
And I reckon that makes sense because the challenge for our game plan is that it's a very taxing game plan. So a team like the Cats can get through your home and away with a model that, I mean, they're a lot more physical this year than they have been. They're really contested ball numbers are through the roof as well, but they've got different gears and different ways of playing, as I was saying before. We've only got the one model. Everyone's got to do the running. Everyone's got to do the kilometres. It's physically very taxing, but it's also very mentally taxing to be in the right spot and to be thinking all the time, all that pointing and stuff. That's the same for the Dogs, and when they won in 16, it's the same for the Tigers. It's hard work to maintain that over a season. But I think the closer you get to the finals and the closer you get to the ultimate goal is that the sort of momentum takes care of itself, because it's in this period of time to get to 11-2. It's in the heart of winter when your wins struggle. We've got a bye the last week. It worked out really well for us, even with, the loss was obviously not great, but it meant that they could be focused in this break. They're not, they understand exactly what happens when they don't bring their full running and their full pressure. So I think it makes total sense that those teams that you noted, George, they start rolling forward, and the closer you get to finals, the momentum towards finals starts to have its own energy, if you like. And I think the critical thing in all of that's impossible to know is injuries. So if we remain fit, then I totally agree, George. We're the best team in the AFL at the moment. There's no reason to think that'll change. Other teams will come at us. Other teams might come up. We haven't talked about Richmond much. They might come up, but they're unlikely to make top 4. They're too far back. And so if we can stay fit, I can't see any reason why we won't win 3 of those 4 teams that you mentioned and finish 1 or 2. So play that first game at the G, the qualifying final at, in front of 100,000 people, hopefully.
I'll have what you guys are having. Let's talk about opposition analysis. We're competing with quite a few teams for final spot, for top 4 spots. You guys were going to, I don't know how you did it, you were going to maybe split up a summary of the game style of our key competitors. You want to go into just a short summary of each one? I guess we'll start by ladder position if you want to go to the Dogs.
We didn't actually decide who do you want to take the Dogs, and I'll take the Dogs. The Dogs are, a team that are different to us in the sense that they move the ball really quickly. They look to, centre clearances are incredibly important. When they're on, they're super aggressive in their ball movement. They go through zones rather than around it. They do switch hard, but they're prepared to run through the centre. They're a fantastic footy team. They're well coached. But as I said before the Dogs game, I was really interested to see how we'd go up against them. I think they've got a flaw in their game plan because pressure breaks it down and they can't hold possession the way that they need to. The way we played them and the way the Tigers beat them in the second half and ended up flogging them in that game makes them susceptible to finals pressure, their model, I think. The other thing is they've got a pretty big weakness down back. They struggle defensively. I had them up high at the beginning of the season. They've come down a couple of notches.
You sort of mentioned in there, and when you guys do it, mention how our game plan stacks up against it. You've covered that. Are you worried about playing them again or in the finals?
Oh, look, yeah, of course. I mean, they're a great team if they can get on the game, the game on their terms. I think they can beat any team when they get going. They're, phenomenal team. And as George has noted previously, and we've talked about, kicking is incredibly important, and I think they're by far the best kicking team in the AFL. But that's where our model is so important, because if we're on, and this is all predicated on us bringing a full pressure and everyone's switched on, they're going to have to find a different way. They're going to have to be aggressive against us. And on any given day, if it all clicks for them, they're probably the best team in the AFL in terms of their ability to hurt oppositions on the scoreboard. I just think that under the pressure of full heat of finals, is that there's too many links in the chain that can be broken.
George, you want to go with the Cats summary of the game style, how we stack up against them, and whether you want to play them in the final?
I think the Cats, for me, are one of the ones that I think we least have to worry about in one sense that, like previous years for Geelong, as the season's gone on, their age starts to show. They're heavily dependent upon possession of the ball, the chip and kick that they tried so desperately to use against us. It's a model which suits them because of the age of their players. They can't afford to run too hard, too long in a game. I think they're starting to show some chinks in their armour around the middle. Selwood isn't what he used to be. Guthrie's taking most of the load these days. They depend heavily on their two big forwards to get them over the line. They've got a fantastic back line. But again, I think they'll struggle once it comes to finals again. They just haven't been able to get over the line. They should have got over the line the last couple of years. I think their opportunities passed them by. So, again, they'll struggle when they get. They're also very lucky in the way they get there simply because they have a large number of games down at Geelong with those really narrow wings. And the pockets that people get trapped in, it suits their game style because they can't afford to run too far. If the finals are played on the MCG or a big ground, they're going to get struggle. They get exposed really badly out on the wider plains. So Geelong will be there, but I don't think they're anything that we'd have to worry about. And I think you've got a couple of other teams that are far ahead of them in terms of getting a result and much more difficult for us to play against.
And yet they're always up there.
They're always up there.
B-Man, you want to take the Lions?
Yeah, I reckon the Lions play an old-fashioned style, really. We talked about it when we played them a couple of weeks back. They got winners on every line. They're very focused on contested footy, so they're right up there in the contested ball stats. That's their challenge. They want the game contested. They get most of their scoring opportunities from stoppages on the wing. That was really interesting watching them play against us in terms of their ball movement. They were really deliberate, and they played smart against us in that first half. They kept the ball slow, the ball movement slow, and worked their way up. They forced boundary line throw-ins, which is what their go is. They bring an extra to the stoppage. They back themselves to win that contest because they've got the big forward guns. They've got Danaher and McStay and Hipwood up there, who they love to get the stoppage on the wing or a mark on the wing to be able to kick that ball to the top of the 50 and have one of those big kick from outside around the arc. Hipwood does it all the time. They're a good footy team, well coached. It was interesting in playing it. When we played them, there was a number of comments. They look slow, but I think that's part. They're deliberate. They struggle when we got the ball behind them. But for me, they're a real threat and a real good chance to win the flag this year.
George, Port Adelaide.
Port Adelaide are a bit of a mixed bag from the games that I've seen them play. They've got the players, but again, it's such a mixed bag. They heavily depend on Wines and Boak. Their forward line, they almost exclusively depend on Dixon, and he's a solid target, but he's just up and down in terms of what he produces. I watched their last game, and they had to finish up putting him into the middle to get him involved in the game, and as soon as they did that, they had no targets up forward. I don't think Hickley's much of a coach. He simply doesn't have the changes that are necessary that are very obvious during the game, and I've seen this a couple of times. I don't think he coaches exclusively from the box, and I think that might be part of the problem that we're starting to see other coaches coming down to the boundary line and leaving the assistants up in the box to do all the analysis. It seems to be a one-man show. I can't recall actually from, it's only television footage, but I can't recall actually seeing anyone sitting alongside him even in the box. So it's a strange sort of setup. they've got some. They do have some great players, but yeah, just so inconsistent, and they may not be there towards the end of the year. I think they might have a tendency to drop off. Robbie Gray's now injured for basically for the rest of the season, I think. So, and that they've depended on him to get a lot of small crumbing type goals for them during the season. So they might really struggle to actually score enough. But yeah, they're still they were my side that I thought would be premiers this year at the start of the season, but I dropped off considerably from where I was.
Yeah, and I reckon a big factor in that, George, is that defensively they're all over the shop. That Geelong Port game was just a defensive horror show. And I mean, one of the things about Cats, why they're such a good footy team, and I actually really think the Cats are a great club, and all power to them for being up there for so long. I agree with your analysis of where they're at, though, George, in terms of come finals. But they have got a great defence, and Stewart was phenomenal in that game against the Dogs. They simply do not win that game of footy without Stewart. But again, it's that narrow ground of the Cardinia Park really suits their intercepting marking, and but they have got a good defence, and they're a really strong contested team. It seems to me Port are one of those teams that need to be up all the time. Like they're sort of, and if they're not up, they're in trouble. And there's been sort of discussion about Rosie being out. Is it Rosie? He's out of the side? No, he's come back in.
No, he's back in. Yeah.
Who's the other sort of
Butters,
who's like, and they've talked about him, Mr. Spark without him, and that sort of concerns me. If you need of course he's a good player, but that if you're needing a spark all the time, they just seem to sort of be a team that needs to have an emotional spark, and if they don't, they struggle.
Yet they've always had the wood on us of late. So let's move on. The Swans, are they a threat? Swans seemed, when I was doing all these ladder predictions, and I was having to have them as wins just because I had my default was to get whoever's at top of the ladder now wins, but there were quite a few where I thought, don't think they're going to win. So where will the Swans be, or where do you see them?
Well, I don't see them as a huge threat just because I think they'll run out of juice. They're a pretty young team. They're similar to Crows, actually. They move the ball. When they're playing well, they move the ball quick, and they like to move it down the ground quickly. They struggle to do that against us, but it's really only a bit of that reputation was built about how they dismantled the Tigers back in the early part of the season by 60-odd points with really super quick ball movement. They've done much better than I had expected, and they're full of talented players, individually talented players. Another great club, well coached. I don't think they're a threat for the flag, though.
Yeah, I agree. Their whole model is around staying in the game for as long as possible and trying to grab it at the end. But I don't think that's a model that currently will win you a final. It did in the Roos days and Longmire's early days, but I think it's a model that suits the Sydney Cricket Ground and not very many other places. And in finals, you're going to have to kick goals, a good number of goals to beat teams. The rest of the teams in the competition, I think, ultimately a team like the Bulldogs will cut them to pieces simply because they'll just run through the lines that the Swans are trying to set up. So let's see them prove me wrong.
Let's move on. West Coast. By the time we play them, they're going to probably have their full squad back, fit and firing. So where do you see them? Obviously, they haven't had their full list, but looks like they're all coming back.
Yeah.
Sorry, you go, Josh.
Yeah, I think that's a big threat with West Coast. They've been winning games without their full list. So when they do get the people like the Shueys back, even Darling and Kennedy have been out for long periods of times, and they're still winning games. So they will be a serious threat. Surprisingly, if this COVID situation develops, West Coast might find themselves in the situation where they have to leave the state and that hasn't boded well for them in the past. So it'll be interesting to see over the next couple of weeks what happens to them. But they're a real threat, I think, once they get up and go, once they get their full team back and get up and go. And if they've certainly got finals in Western Australia, it's going to be difficult to beat them over there, although Essendon managed to do it a couple of weeks ago. But again, they didn't have all their players available.
And finally, the Tigers, Bin Man.
I honestly think that you've got to be top four. I mean, of course, there's the example that's often used is the Dogs. So they're just not going to, they'll make the finals, you'd expect, and they're a terrific footy team. And I'm guilty all the time of underestimating them. Well, maybe it's sort of hoping they'll fall away, and I'm a bit sick of them. I'm really sick of Hardwick. Great footy club. They're not. I don't think they're going to push for a flag because they're not going to finish top four. So I really think that it's Dogs, Lions, and Cats are the teams that we'll play one of those teams in the qualifying final. And for me, the team that I'd least likely to play, it was the Dogs at the beginning of the season, but it's Brisbane now. I think they're the team that's probably best set up and suited to beat us.
All right, well, let's move on. We're going to talk about the players now. Let's go through this quickly, because I think we're hitting on 2 hours already. So let's go through this top five in the Bluey. Are we doing this where we think they are now, or at the end of the year? And
I reckon where they are now. So that.
Well, it's easy for me. I'll
go then, Andy.
Clayton Oliver, Christian Petrarca, Christian Salem. He's dropped off a little bit the last few weeks, but I think he's up there. Max Gawn and Jake Lever. Special mentions to Ed Langdon and Tom McDonald. B-Man, you want to go?
I might, in the thread that was on Demon Land, has Bluey, has Oliver, Gawn, Track, Lever, and Salem. And I'm just going through quickly in the Bluey, CHF has Petrarca, Oliver, Gawn, top three, and then the last two spots could be filled by Lever, May, Salem in defence, Langdon on the wing might be pushing there, T-Mac and even Fritsch. And personally, I've got, just have a look here, I've got Oliver, Max, Salem, who I think has been incredibly important for us this year, Lever, Track with honourable mentions to May, Langdon, T-Mac, Spargs and Nibbler.
George, did I ask
you've got it. I think you've got it all covered there. I think Petrarca and Oliver will be fighting for the top two positions, and everyone else will poll very well. May and Gawn and Langdon and Salem all are going to be up there, particularly the way the Blueies voted on. It's not just a 1, 2, 3. So players like May keep getting overlooked in traditional types of role and traditional types of awards, but I think he'll be up there quite consistently, the same as Lever.
Yeah, given that they do the votes, very differently. If they play their role, they're going to feature up there.
Yep.
Let's go most improve. You made a point, Bin Man, of saying other than T-Mac. Even with that, even with you prefacing that, I didn't have him there as most improved. I've got James Jordan all the way. Well, I don't know if you count him as most improved because we hadn't seen him much until then, but he's been the revelation this year for me. I really love the kid. George?
He had one game and got dropped, didn't he? So that's fair. It's a fair base to come off.
There you go. All right, B-Man, you're talking. Who do you want? Who do you?
So I'm reading it. So what say what had Pickett, Lever, Salem all gone from very good players to at least all Aussie squad of 40. Let's have a look here.
Well, I don't know if Pickett would be in the All-Australian squad.
He'd be close as a small forward, wouldn't he?
I don't know. I don't think he's done enough yet.
Most improved CHF has a few in the discussion, but Rivers on a steep improvement arc. Spargo as well. Charlie gets a lot of the ball. and he uses it really well when his game complements Kickett's really well. For me, I most improved is Nibbler and Spargo. I couldn't split him. I think Nibbler's been on an upward trajectory, but from where he was a couple of years ago into this year, I think he's an underrated player. Really important to our structure, particularly our forward half pressure. And Spargo's just gone up to another level. Both underrated. Perhaps Nibbler more so underrated, but both really important to the way we play footy.
George?
I think we have to follow the T-Mac lead with this one. T-Mac started eating meat. Apparently Spargo stopped drinking beers. So that's worked pretty well for him. I think he's been a dramatic improvement from where he was as a sort of a marginal player last year and the year before. He's now an integral part of the way the ball moves into the forward line. But the one I think who's been most critical to us has been Ed Langdon. When you've got other teams refusing to go anywhere near Ed Langdon's wing, that's a real sign that he's something special there, and he's come a long way. And particularly the way his kicking's improved, he's gone from being the ball might go left, the ball might go right. He's far more predictable, and the drive that he gives us is just superb up that wing.
I think what we might do, we might move on to our next point. We've got highlights for the year for all. I'll start with you, George. We might do it all in one. Favourite win, one in-game highlight, and any other highlights you want to.
I think my favourite win was the Bulldogs. I was really impressed with the apart from beating them, just how well we beat them from a coaching perspective. We outthought them in all the aspects of the game. They really didn't know what to do during that game. They didn't know where to go because they'd never run into a team that had done that to them. So, that was just fantastic. The one game highlight, I think Nathan Jones' 300 games against Richmond was a great highlight for the club. And we'll always talk about Cossie's dancing goals against St Kilda in particular. To this stage, I don't know how in the hell he evaded 4 or 5 St Kilda players to dance through the lot of them and kick that goal. I think it was in the second quarter, but it was just something amazing. He's finally come out and shown us what he's truly capable of.
Big man.
And I might rip through from the thread, Andy. So Watt's favourite win was the Tigers Anzac Eve, even though he also loved the Footscray win. But the Tigers Anzac Eve's a big one. In-game highlight: Cozzy Ducks, Cozzy Weaves, Cozzy goals, round 2 versus the Saints. And random highlights: Viney goal after about 20 seconds in round 2 versus Saints, which was a ripper, wasn't it? Having full confidence that Lever will mark everything. And Ben Brown's first Lily-esque run-up in goal, winning the first 9 games of the season, was a highlight for him as well. And Dees Zepha's favourite win was Can't Split Anzac Eve in the Sydney victory. And the Sydney game, but one of the most brutal and physical matches which he's seen, and I think that's right. It was incredible. In-game highlight: T-Mac's left foot goal against the Swans after bursting out of a pack, and a random highlight was Salem's overall game against the Saints. Simply brilliant. Walking Civil War's favourite win was the Bulldogs, coming after the loss to the Adelaide, and personal favourite moment was versus Carlton, Cozzy gesturing that he touched the goal, honesty, integrity right there. So I had a different take on that one, but we'll leave that for another time. Forever Demons, any team, especially us being 11-2, is a highlight. And Delusional Demons' favourite win was comeback against Brisbane. So on Melbourne, like clinical and measured. In-game highlight: Track's goal in the last against Richmond, very dusty-like. And another highlight was his Cozzy's second goal against the Saints. Last one, the highlight for CHF was T-Mac's goal against Brisbane after that long chain that we talked about. It was amazing. It was fantastic. The quality of Salem's game has been another random highlight. So, and for me, they could have picked any number of things really for favourite win. That was the Tigers in the end, because even though I love beating the Cats and I thought the Swans was a really terrific game of footy, it's the Tigers are the benchmark for me, and I think we measure ourselves up against them, and we came out the better footy team. Really, they had a pretty good team on the park. In-game highlight, I could have picked any number. Apologies to Sparg's tackle on Hooley in that game. That really helped turn that game our way. T-Mac's set shot from the boundary in the Swans game, which I called when I was there, and it had that fella in the crowd with a big finger. That was brilliant. Any of Cozzy's goals, but the one that jumped out for me actually was the third quarter of the Roos game. Jackson had 10+ possessions, took most of the ruck work, allowing Max to push forward. He'd been well held by Goldie. Cozzy played brilliantly. Jordan stood up, and Jordan got a goal in the last quarter after they sort of come back at us. But I just thought it was such a good sign for the future that it was the young players that turned that game around, and we could have easily lost that game. And I just thought that just boded so well for both this season and for the next 5 to 10 years that it was those three players that stood up.
For me, favourite win. Look, it could be any number of the ones we've won against the other top 8 teams. I love beating Geelong. I've got nephews that are Geelong supporters, and we have bets every year on who's going to finish higher, and I've only won that once in 12 years or so since my oldest nephew's been alive. So I love beating them, but I disqualify the Bulldogs and Brisbane game because we couldn't be there, even though it was great watching it at home. But for me, being at the Richmond game was just fantastic. Big crowd, and had perfect seats, and we just had a fantastic win. In-game highlight, I really love that chain of handballs. Someone else had mentioned it against Brisbane. It was just perfect to watch and a great finish. And my random highlight is the amount of times I've just opened up either any number of the footy apps just to have a random glimpse at the ladder and us being on top. I think we've been on top, has it been 7 weeks this year, which is the most since 1964. I've never been sort of able to do that in a year of football on a consistent basis for weeks in, weeks out. So hopefully that continues. We got an extra week out of it. I wasn't expecting Geelong to win, so that was nice. But just looking at the Dees being on top of the ladder, it's a fantastic thing to see, and I wish I just had more confidence in us, and hopefully we finish up there at the end of the year.
Andy, I've got one bit of advice for you. For the rest of the season, do not go anywhere near the ladder predictor.
No, I've done it. I've deleted it off my computer.
All your alternate realities, none of them have us finishing top, and we're currently top.
I purposely disqualified that from happening because that was the obvious. If we win every game, we end
George
up top.
and I might have to do an intervention, I think.
Yeah, no, it's gonna. I tell you, a premiership is the only thing that can solve it. That's all I want, and then I'll be
cured.
No, I won't quite be. I won't quite be cured. But then come the next year in the Marsh series, I'll be complaining that we don't win in the first game.
A good club would win too.
I remember one of the guys that works in the office above where we are is a mad Richmond supporter, and after they won that premiership the next year, I remember. Was it us that played them after they won the premiership in the pre-season? I can't remember, but whatever it was, the Marsh series had started, and this guy's a mad Richmond supporter. He didn't even know the Marsh series had started. That's what winning a premiership out of nowhere does.
Yeah,
does to you.
We know all about that pre-season. It's an important part of any Melbourne fans.
Pre-season, we're there from day one training. This guy didn't even know the Marsh series had started. They'd been training for it, and this guy would go down to pre-season training normally. Anyway.
He was probably still recovering from the hangover he had.
Most likely, and now he's got 3 premierships. So let's hope we can do that. All right, let's any quick comments about the Bombers game? Maybe just in terms of we know Viney's coming in, who's coming out, and do we reckon Ben Brown's going to be playing? Big man. Oh no, sorry, George. I'll go, George. You first.
All right. I think Ben Brown's near certainty. We've got to try something else. The Wiedemann experiment, I said previously, has not worked. So I think we've got to go that way. Viney comes in. It's a big toss-up about who goes out. Probably Sparrow. I think Harms's position is in a bit of doubt because Viney brings so much more than what Harms does in the middle. But we'll wait and see. At least the coach has got lots of options this week. Before the Essendon and Hawthorn game had even started, I thought the only solution to this game, if the Hawks want to win, is to stop Stringer. Essendon, I don't think, despite all the media hype, which you sort of expect at the moment, they're thin on pretty well a lot of the lines that they've got. They've got some fantastic young talent. It'll be inconsistent, but the difference between the two sides was Stringer. Hawthorn won nearly every single statistic on the ground on the day, but Stringer's able to kick 4 goals from absolutely nothing, and that got him over the line. So we've got to do the same sort of thing. Just shut him down, and they'll be starved of opportunities.
Who plays on him?
Well, that'll be the big question, won't it? Maybe a Viner goes on him. He's a lazy player though. If he doesn't get the ball, he drops right off. So I think he can be exploited in a big way during the game. But once he gets his tail up, and you don't want the rest of the Essendon side getting their tail up, we've got to hit them really, really quickly. Get them the way we want to play, and we'll grind out the win.
They'll put Hibbert on him. And he played more midfield.
Yeah, he's playing midfield almost exclusively now.
Yeah, only in the last 2-3 weeks. So he'll get crunched by our midfield. And, I think that Parrish is the one they'll need to tag. And, he's a explosive player, but he's not up to he's not a midfielder like Oliver and Trax. So,
no.
If he'll end up, here's my take, he'll play midfield, but he'll get smashed and they'll have to push him forward, and then Hibbert can take him down there.
Yep. In the end, they played Hawthorn. I don't want to eat my words next week.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is we'll beat them if we bring our full pressure, our full running, our all-team defence, and we come, ready to play. We'll beat, we'll beat everyone in the AFL. But if we're off even a bit, any team can beat us. And they're on, and they move the ball really well when they're on. They were brilliant against. In patches against Richmond, and particularly when they got back in that game, and they played great against West Coast. So that they got the game. They've got some good players who can light it up on any given day. But if we come with the right head space and bring our game, then we'll be stretches too good for them.
I can't believe they're only letting 25,000 people in. Come on. I want to go. Hopefully I can get tickets. All right, boys. I think we did a good wrap up. There were some few more things we did want to talk about, but it is getting on. I think we're at nearly 2 hours and 20 minutes, but 11-2 deserves a good analysis of, and I think we've done a good job of that. So thank you very much for all your preparation, and thank you to Axis of Bob, who provided some extra thing. Was there anyone else who gave you some stuff?
Well, just for that thread actually, and other people on Demonland, there's been really good discussion about our tactics and the way we play this year, and a real benefit actually being on the top of the ladder is there's so much information about us in the newspapers and on the footy shows, and hope bloody Carlton and Collingwood sort themselves out so they stop talking about the political machinations there and just focus on the Melbourne Football Club. That would be my message to the AFL going forward.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you, B-Man. Thank you, George. Really appreciate it. And, we'll be back next week. Go Demons.
Go Red Legs.
See ya.